Hello,
Hey
everyone.
everyone, welcome to Free Assange Vigil 43.2. This is 43 straight weeks of bringing this to you guys. Um, let's get to the numbers right off the top. We're at 3,432 days since the start of the illegal and arbitrary detention of Julian Assange, 385 days since he was trafficked from the Ecuadorian embassy for a $4.2 billion IMF loan to Ecuador, 1,061 days of incarceration for Reality Winner. Julian's trial has been postponed to either July or August or November. We're not sure yet. We'll update you as soon as we know. On the positive note, Chelsea Manning is enjoying her 48th day of freedom after the 10-year-long WikiLeaks grand jury was dismissed and she was released from William G. Truesdale Detention Center. My name is Steve Poikinen. I'm joined tonight by Andrew Smith and Kendra Christian. And our guest this evening, man, you just told me and I'm going to fuck it up. Now I'm all nervous. Archikina. All right?
Yes.
Yes, Morgan
Yes.
Archikina and Daniel DeCeter. Morgan was with us covering our event in front of the White House and at Chelsea Manning and Jeremy Hammond's prison on behalf of Sputnik News. And Daniel DeCeter is an activist and organizer for Action for Assange, North Carolina. Really looking forward to the conversation tonight. So without any further delay, how are the two of you? Morgan, how's it going? It's been a while since we saw you.
Yeah. Well, I'm doing pretty good, I guess. Doing the best I can to report on things from the comfort of my own home. So, I don't know. How are you guys doing?
How are you doing, Daniel?
I'm good, man. It's very good to see you all again. It's been since February, but yeah, doing what I can to organize still under this lockdown. But yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of start things off, later we're going to be getting into the Roger Stone interview, or the Roger Stone warrants that came out in regards to WikiLeaks and that connection there. But to start off, I do want to talk a little bit because you guys have quite an extensive history as activists and organizers, and then you as a journalist, Morgan. So could you talk a little bit about your history in journalism and the different activist movements you've been involved in?
Yeah, sure. Well, you know that I'm a staff writer for Sputnik News Agency. And I've written for some other outlets too, for Mint Press News. I'm also a reporter for Liberation News, which is a publication by the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And I do housing organizing work with a group called Link Up, which fights gentrification and issues of housing justice and mass incarceration in Washington, D.C. So that's kind of what I do in my free time. Yeah, I don't know, before I got my job at Sputnik, I was actually a history teacher. I was an adjunct history instructor at a community college, and that's what I studied in school and stuff. So it's kind of, and before that I was a line cook. So that's my history.
Could you talk a little bit about how you've seen activism change in the last, since February at this point, and some successes you've seen throughout different activist groups?
Since February?
Yeah, since the whole lockdown and social distance and everything started.
Oh, right. I was thinking February 2019. I was like, okay, it's been an interesting year. I forgot that it's almost May. Time just kind of ended. I stopped keeping track of what the days were. Yeah. So since the lockdown began, well, okay. So last weekend, we had a cancel the rents protest, car-based protest. It was in, I think, more than 40 cities across the country, that was organized around the basis of some widely agreed upon popular demands, that the government should cancel the rents, during the crisis, that it should cancel debts accumulated in they're, especially, like, I can tell you about DC specifically, which is where I live. They allowed mortgage payments to be deferred, but not rent payments. And they banned evictions, but once the evictions are, once the time is up, and they can evict people again, people are going to have months worth of rent, because they haven't been getting paid. So basically the argument is, like, if we're not getting paid, we shouldn't have to pay rent. So that was pretty effective, I guess, kind of a novel way of protesting in people's cars. But yeah, I mean, I guess it was weird because everything kind of shifted gears real quick, and, like, kind of, I guess, the typical activist response to, like, a national crisis and mounds of bullshit coming from the government is to march out into the streets. And this is a situation where you can't do that. You can't knock on people's doors. You can't talk to people on the street corner about the issue. So you have to find new ways to do it. So a lot of that has been mutual aid and stuff. My apartment building, we have just such a mutual aid project, which is for getting food and medicine, trips to the pharmacy and things for, like, elderly folks or folks who have disabilities and whatever. So it's been kind of a unique opportunity to engage with people in the community that maybe we wouldn't have otherwise had an ability to engage in. And of course, a lot of the issues are still perennial too, right? Mass incarceration is still an issue too, because a lot of these jails have not been emptied. They are over capacity. They are stuffed full of people who really do not deserve to be in jail or in prison because they haven't committed violent offenses. And the prisons and the jails have become breeding grounds for COVID-19. And the DC City Jail is just one such example. So there is still much organizing to be done around that too.
And then you, Daniel, you're a Action for Assange organizer out in North Carolina. Could you talk a little bit about the work that you were doing before the lockdown and then kind of how that's changed?
Yeah. So I guess my story is similar to Kendra's. I've heard other people on here too say the same thing as far as, I've always supported WikiLeaks and have been following what's been happening with Julian Assange for a long time. And when they took his internet away, I think that was the first time I got really concerned. I mean, it's kind of sad that we almost long for those days when he was back in the embassy, which is still torture. But yeah, as soon as he was dragged out of that embassy, that really impacted me, like a lot of you, and I've heard other people say. And that was when I decided I had to really get out in the streets and do something about it. It can't just be online, and had to do something with all the anger that I was feeling. So I looked, I'd heard of, like, Unity for J and things like that, and kind of searched around to see if there were some groups in my area that I could just plug into. But really there was nothing as far as being on the street. And so I just decided to do it myself. I started making flyers for Julian and putting contact information on them in case people wanted to get involved too. And it really kind of took off from there. We have a team. It's not a huge team right now. Well, with the lockdown, everything's we have to get more creative. But yeah, there's a bunch of us down here. I reached out to Steve at one point to let him know what I was working on here, and you all were very kind to me, of course. And yeah, it became one of the first chapters of Action for Assange.
And let's be perfectly clear, I'm not always nice. I'm not. I just, obviously supported what you were doing, and that led to or you had a prior relationship with Ray McGovern, at least in communicating, and you have now published to Ray McGovern's website. Yeah, is that correct? I'm pretty sure that's right.
Yes, yeah, that is correct. He was also very kind to me. He was speaking at a church here near me in Chapel Hill, and I learned about that and was like, holy crap, I definitely have to go to this. And talked to him afterwards, and we basically just kind of kept in touch by email and things like that, and met up, one time, and just like, we have to do something for Julian, and he just said, well, what are we gonna do? And that was kind of like what also inspired me to like I guess, as far as what's going on in the streets of North Carolina right now, like, it's not much. And but yeah, so we've kept in touch ever since. I wrote an article about what I've been working on here, and yeah, he was kind enough to publish it for me on his website. He's a very kind soul.
He is. That was a great article too, Daniel. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Morgan, I was wondering, how long have you been a supporter of WikiLeaks, and when did you sort of first discover them? I mean, kind of right away back in 2010, or was it more recent, or?
Yeah, I would say it was probably Chelsea Manning's case that really kind of caught my attention of WikiLeaks. I mean, obviously, actually, no, I think like the collateral murder thing was because I was like, that would have been like my senior year of college or immediately after. So yeah, that's the first time that I can remember hearing about WikiLeaks or even kind of discussing the role of that kind of a website or of a source as a way of exposing that kind of those kinds of issues, like what she had published, for example. So yeah, I would say that's about it.
Okay.
We just had the 9-year anniversary of the release of the Gitmo files, and that was part of the material that Chelsea had given over to WikiLeaks. Is there any particular thing? I mean, collateral murder kind of stands as its own horrific testimony to U.S. imperialism. But in terms of the Manning leaks specifically, is there anything that stands out, Morgan, in your mind that you'll carry with you throughout the rest of your career as a journalist and beyond?
Well, the collateral murder video is horrific, and I'm going to think about that forever, especially as a journalist. But I would say definitely the Afghanistan war logs, because of what they expose is just the kind of it's what it is it's 1,000 little collateral murders. It's a repeated little lies and fibs and mistruths and withholdings of information and manipulation of narratives and just all these kind of dirty tricks. You're going to be talking about Roger Stone, I guess that's kind of our theme tonight, is dirty tricks. That's what it is. Like, it's kind of it's really glimpsing, the inside the sausage factory of international diplomacy, and in particular how the U.S. managed a disastrous war that it got some 20 other nations or whatever to sign on to. So the Afghanistan war logs are just like really, really damning, because it's just so many people involved over such a long period of time, and it's bad. You kind of see really frankly what nations think of each other. It's kind of the behind closed doors, when you don't think anybody is listening kind of thing, is really what's at the heart of those memos and stuff.
I agree, and that's ultimately how I felt about Cablegate too, because you really get a sense of how these people talk when they think nobody's looking. I know that. I'm sorry, I got like 8 other things going on in the next room.
I think I actually mixed a little bit of Cablegate and Afghanistan war logs, because they are very similar.
But no, you're right though. The Afghanistan war logs is basically death by 1,000 cuts, especially when you get to the cost of war. And we see these, like, the Afghan papers come out in the Washington Post. And I can't remember who was making the point about this. It might have been Jason Burmis. But by the time we get to the Washington Post releasing the Afghan files, there's basically like a, yeah, we know, in terms of the way that the media or the public receives it. But to me, what that did was vindicate everything that Chelsea Manning had done and everything that WikiLeaks had done almost 10 years prior. And the fact that it took, several years and a couple of $1 million in FOIA requests and lawyers and whatnot in order for the Washington Post to get that material, when all they would have had to have done from the get-go is just keep printing WikiLeaks material, is out fucking standing. Because it's one of those things that further proves the need for both scientific journalism and public disclosure outlets, even though public disclosure outlets, according to the 2020 NDAA, are the exact same groups as ISIS, al-Nusra, and Hezbollah.
Yeah, and the Afghanistan papers are really interesting because I've been covering kind of like the SIGAR reports, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction reports that come out quarterly that review really kind of the what according to Washington is supposed to be the meat and potatoes of the U.S. mission in Afghanistan, which is building a viable civil society and a government that can stand on its own 2 feet, that has democratic legitimacy and transparency and kind of all of those kinds of things. And I remember it was about a year, I think, or so before the Afghanistan papers were printed. There was a report from SIGAR about how the agency in the Afghan government that was responsible for investigating corruption was itself corrupt, which is kind of an example of just kind of the ridiculousness of 16 years into this mission has accomplished really nothing. And then a month or 2 months, because the Washington Post published those in it was late November, early December, right? I think so. A month or two before that, the U.S. forces Afghanistan, the U.S. mission in Afghanistan, said that it wasn't going to tell SIGAR what. Basically, it was going to stop giving them data about. I'm sorry, no, it was the previous October, was when they decided they were going to stop reporting. They were going to stop reporting on district control numbers, which is basically like how much of the country does the Taliban control? Basically, these estimates. They started going downhill very steadily, and eventually, basically, they decided this is too embarrassing. Trump went on some kind of rant about how we print all these reports and we're just telling the enemy information we know and stuff, and told them to stop printing these reports and stop telling them this information, which is ridiculous because talk about transparency. The only people who don't know how the war is going are the public, who are the ones who are supposed to know who these reports are for. The Taliban knows how the war is going. The people in the military know how the war is going. The people in the Pentagon know how the war is going. The Trump administration knows. The U.S. public are the ones, and the international community who would read those reports, are the ones who would find out from that. So there's been this effort to really hide a deteriorating situation there for a long time. And yeah, like you said, the Afghanistan papers were just kind of the final nail in the coffin. There had already been, a dozen other nails hammered in by that point.
So we had talked a little bit earlier. Danny had brought up Ray McGovern, and Ray McGovern and his work with Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity have done an absolutely amazing job at picking through and literally bit by bit debunking Russiagate, showing how the transfer rates on the emails don't match up to something being physically downloaded onto a USB drive versus transferred across the internet, and multiple different things like that, as well as Bill Binney. But we actually this week had a warrant get released that was the warrant that was used to seize the communications from WikiLeaks and Julian Assange's Twitter accounts in the prosecution of Roger Stone. Have you guys had a chance to read over this yet? Did you have a chance to scroll through? Do you have any initial thoughts about it?
Yeah, I read through it, but I mean, I'll let him go first since I just ran my mouth.
No, I did. I haven't read the whole 30 whatever pages, but yeah, the highlighted parts, and I've heard what Jason Burmis had to say about it too. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting, especially the way that the mainstream media is trying to cover it. At least, I guess the Daily Beast, like trying to continue this Russiagate narrative. And as you said, Andrew, we know, and Bill Benny and Ray McGovern have proven that, you know, this Russiagate narrative is false. But yeah, they're going to try and keep it going at all costs, you know. But
well, and that's the ridiculous part, because it's really, really easy for lazy legacy media to take a look at the Roger Stone warrant and be like, it's proof of collusion, you know, like a bunch of just clapping little fucking brain dead monkeys. But when you actually when you actually read it, when you actually look at it, what it is Julian Assange and WikiLeaks just messing with the Guccifer account and never giving Roger Stone anything that he could take to the media for both self-aggrandizement and the glorification of Donnie Johns. He's fucking with them, like clearly fucking with them and not helping them whatsoever. So this narrative that like, oh, it's proof they talked. You knew they talked. You got a warrant for their Twitter DMs. You knew they talked, but what you're not reporting on is what they talked about and how the conversation went. And the fact that we can have these giant tech companies that have zero regard for your privacy, that will sell your direct messages to, you know, anyone who needs to buff up their data profile or hand them directly over to the government. That's what's not being discussed in these outlets. And that's why we all exist. That's why Morgan's an independent media. That's why we are. That's why Daniel is. It's why we're doing what we're doing, is to actually show you these documents, primary source material, and then you guys can go and form your own opinion about that. We're not going to try to tell you how to think about it, even though we told you what's in them. You know, does that make any sense?
Definitely. I think that's like actually with talking to people about Assange, that some of the, you know, biggest successes that I've had is just saying like, look, here's an email, here's all the source documents, take a look at this for yourself, take a look at why don't you read his statement, you know, on the Swedish case, why don't just read all of these things. And pretty much anybody who does, you know, comes out basically a different person in a way. You know, you see that like, okay, oh my goodness, all of these things have just been a complete lie or totally blown out of proportion. And I remember thinking a similar thing, Steve, reading those as well, that it was just like, well, this just all seems like a whole lot of nothing. You know, it doesn't prove anything.
No, what it proves is that Guccifer 2.0 never got what they wanted. It proves that Roger Stone never got what he wanted. It proves that Julian Assange is clever by half or more, you know, than either of these accounts. And it shatters the Russiagate propaganda. The same thing with Reality Winners documents. If you actually go to The Intercept and you read those documents, it does more to discredit Russiagate than it does to bolster it.
And that's the crazy part too with the Reality Winner documents, not to pull us to that subject for too long, is that every time it references something, it uses allegedly or may have been hampered by, or we don't know if it was successful. And that's something that you see throughout the entire Russiagate narrative is this may have happened this way, and then 17 pages of redactions, which is why I think this warrant in particular is so important, because it shows a side of the story that the public hadn't seen before, which is the direct communications between WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, Guccifer 2, Roger Stone, and then it actually shows Stone and Corsi's emails and communications about Stone's communications with WikiLeaks. And it basically shows how on one extent, Stone was just blowing smoke up everyone's ass about what he knew and who he was. And then on the other hand, it shows that the entire narrative in and of itself really just falls apart at the slightest scrutiny.
And I mean, the thing, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and I mean, the thing about, that's the thing that really stuck out to me is that this is exactly the kind of person that Roger Stone is. I actually looked it up because I remember I actually covered a good part of Roger Stone's case for Sputnik. And back in 2008, where did I put it? Back in 2008, Donald Trump called Roger Stone a, quote, stone cold loser who, quote, always tries taking credit for things he never did. And I mean, that is okay. Not only is that what that email exchange or DM exchange or whatever shows, and in that he like tries to like rhetorically position himself where he's like, you know, I'm your man who's going to defend WikiLeaks, you know, from Washington. I'm the only one who can like turn the tables if they come after you, which is obviously a lie because 6 months after the last of those emails is when the criminal complaint against Assange was filed in December 2017. And so that's obviously, you know, a lie, but also, like you said, like he's just kind of blowing smoke up people's ass, which is exactly what he did during his trial over the last year, where he like the judge like kind of had to shut him up because he was like running his mouth to the media everywhere and like kind of trying to like position himself in such a way that it was like he's trying to like win the high ground, win an advantageous point for himself in this by like positioning himself as a person who like you need to like win over his good side in order for you to benefit. And he does that in those emails with WikiLeaks too, where he's I think they're like, you know, you need to stop making these claims about how, you know, you have contact with us and influence and whatever. And he's just like, maybe you should remember who your friends are or whatever, you know, as if his attitude toward WikiLeaks should matter to them at all. So I thought that was a really interesting part of that exchange, was that it was a continuation of his personality. So
I was thinking something similar. I also thought it was interesting. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, I was kind of thinking in half thoughts. You can go ahead.
No, I was thinking something similar. I also thought it was interesting that he kept, you know, when he was getting the brush off, you know, he kept trying to say, oh, well, your organization is so leaky and you're, you know, I mean, which was just ignored. But, you know, I found that to be really interesting as well, too, with nothing substantive behind it. And then, you know, I just think it's always so important to remember that what Russiagate has been successful in is just distracting everybody from what was released, which was so terrible. I mean, the DNC leaks they were terrible, you know, and people still to this day, it's so frustrating to me that we can't seem to separate in our minds, like, yes, Trump is terrible. Yes. But this is also really bad and it needs to be addressed, you know, and people need to account for these things. I don't know.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Are you suggesting that people be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, Kendra? Because it's 2020 and I'm not sure if we're ready for that. We just figured out how to wash our hands. Right? We got to start with shapes and colors before we get to walking and chewing gum at the same time. What is it?
Maybe 2021.
We live in a fucking cartoon. We do.
So if we could we get the first part pulled up here? Because we're actually going to start with the last 2 pages of the document. It's a 31-page warrant that got released. There's a bunch of pages of fluff in it, but this part in particular really breaks down what they were looking for. So I think this is one of the most important pieces to start with, simply for the fact that it shows that this was as deep and intrusive as possible of a warrant to get this information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had that highlighted too on the last kind of summary of information to be seized by the government.
So,
I
yeah,
can reread it because I haven't thought about it all day.
Let's go over it real quick. All information described above in Section 1 that constitutes fruits, evidence, and instrumentalities of violations of this code, fraud and related activities in connection with computers, foreign contributions, ban, conspiracy to commit an offense against the United States, aiding and abetting since March 1st, 2016, including for each user ID identified on Attachment A, which is Stone, Corsi, the WikiLeaks account, and Julian Assange's account, pertaining to the following matters. Any correspondence regarding hacked emails or other data from the DNC, the email belonging to John Podesta, any other individual related to the 2016 United States election. That's pretty freaking broad. Any communication between the target accounts and individuals associated with the DNC email hack, any communications indicating any advance or knowledge of direction, planning, or control of the email hack, any communications related to the website putintrump.org, evidence indicating how and when the Twitter account was accessed or used to determine the chronological and geographic context of account access, use, and events relating to the crime under investigation and to the Twitter account owner, evidence indicating the Twitter account owner's state of mind as it relates to the crime under investigation. Yo, look, Roger Stone has done more cocaine than like entire freaking states. All right. Like the population of Delaware and Rhode Island combined have not done the amount of cocaine that Roger Stone has. So I'm not sure. Let's see, the identity of persons who created or used the user ID, including records that help reveal the whereabouts of such persons, the identity of the persons who communicated with the accounts about matters related to the subsections mentioned above, including records that help reveal their whereabouts. Andrew, I what do you think about that, buddy?
Well, I think
Andrew's AWOL.
Oh, okay. Andrew's, I can't see. I've got the screen on. Anybody, I jump in wherever while I pull up the next section of docs.
Well, if I remember right, this section is preceded by one in which they discuss basically like how you can determine someone's identity by looking at their metadata. In particular, location, and kind of like it kind of gives you a real play-by-play of like all the potential ways in which Twitter might, depending on what you turn on or don't turn on, track like vital information about you. And so when I read this, it had me thinking about like, basically, they don't seem to really believe, I guess, that somebody in this is who they say they are 100%. Because if I remember right, stuff with Guccifer, the original Guccifer, the Romanian guy, had to do with like, did he use a Russian IP address for this particular thing or whatever? And like, that is part of what they tried to say. That's what this reminded me of. This reminded me, it looked like they were trying to scoop up information that they weren't directly saying they wanted. You know what I mean? Like they said they wanted this, all this information for this reason, but really what they're after is this other part, which is this information about like, were these people actually where they say they were? Like, was it always logged into in the Ecuadorian embassy or in, you know, Washington, D.C. or, you know, wherever it was, or, you know, was this in, you know, happening in Moscow or, you know, or in Russia or something like that? Because that was something that I remember they used, for example, against Guccifer. So yeah, that was kind of what it reminded me of, was like maybe they're looking, because it doesn't seem really like in the whole document they're saying like, this is the account that belongs to Julian Assange, this is the account that belongs to WikiLeaks, this is the account that belongs to this and that person, and it's like all of a sudden it's like, well, if you know who these people are, why would you need to verify who they are? Like, you know where Roger Stone's house is. They know where it is because they kicked it down when they came to arrest him. But in a fucking FBI, like a SWAT raid, it was ridiculous. But yeah, so that's what this struck me as, was like, they're really grabbing this information for some other reason, probably.
No, and that's a very good point too. When they went after Stone, they went after him like he was, you know, fucking Johnny Escobar over there. They brought the heat, dude. It was nuts. And to make regular people feel sorry for Roger Stone is a really mean trick. It is. Like, I don't have to like Roger Stone though to admit that the police went heavy-handed on that. Daniel, what do you got on this, bud?
Right, that was on CNN, right? CNN Live. They busted.
Oh yeah, they called the media.
yeah. I mean, yeah. Again, I agree with you. It's another situation, just like when Alex Jones was deplatformed. I mean, you have to. It's not, especially somebody like Roger Stone. It's not a great guy. He's the godfather of lobbying, and don't feel great standing up for him. But in this case, I mean, you have to, and I mean, back to the documents. I like this Guccifer. Isn't there a part in the document where they're basically asking WikiLeaks what's in the documents, even though they're supposedly the ones who hacked the documents?
Yes. And that's what's really interesting, because then WikiLeaks' reply is like, I'm not going to tell you what's in the documents because you might be hacked by the US government. And if you go back and read that, it's like, what? It's a really good point, because they're like, what is going on? Which is interesting, because the original Guccifer said that the Guccifer 2.0 account is a US intelligence agency operation. Anyway, like, that's always been his line. But yeah, that's what immediately jumped out at me too. I don't know if he is or not. I'm not saying anything about what it is, what that account is or whatever. But if it was, it wouldn't be the first time that the U.S. has accused one of its own agents of actually being a Russian agent. So that's kind of what they've done with Joseph Mifsud, for example.
And the interesting thing, too, with Vault 7, it showed us the NSA and CIA hacking tools that allow them to change portions of files to show that they are in a different location. So I think that really piles on with the Guccifer 2, where if you're a Russian hacker, you're not going to leave a trail that says you're a Russian hacker, because you're obviously smart enough to know how to remove those. So with the Vault 7 releases from WikiLeaks that showed how the NSA, CIA, and other letter agencies were injecting this to show themselves not as Americans but as Russians is really, critical throughout this whole thing, is because we don't actually know. All we have is a literal data tag on a PDF that says this dude may be a Russian. But if he's a hacker, he's going to be smart enough to take that off.
Well, and it also seemed like, reading through there, that he couldn't really even figure out how to get the information over. Did anybody get that at all when they were reading it? There was constantly a problem with that. And I found that kind of interesting as well. You'd think somebody that, was that savvy would, to get those documents in the first place, would be a little bit more able to send them over.
There's so many holes in the Guccifer persona at this point. Like, it's just ridiculousness on top of ridiculousness. I'm going to go to now, because we're talking about it. I'm going to bring up the section of the documents that deals specifically with Guccifer 2.0, and we can sort of run through those. According to public and unclassified intelligence report prepared by the USIC, Russian intelligence gained access to the Democratic National Committee networks in July 2015 and maintained that access until June 2016. So right off the bat, they don't have any substantiated evidence of that. This is a warrant application, and when you're going to get a warrant, whoever needs to be muted should mute, because I can hear me coming through the thing. When you're applying for a warrant, when you're law enforcement agency applying for a warrant, what you're doing is selling a story, a narrative. So to use language like this is just part of that narrative sales process, because again, to this day, is no concrete evidence that the statements I'm about to read bear any fact in reality. By March 2016, the Russian Military Intelligence General Staff Main Intelligence Directorate, or GRU, probably began cyber operations aimed at the U.S. election. The GRU operations resulted in compromise of personal email accounts within the DNC and other Democratic Party officials and political figures. By, in, or about May 2016, GRU had exfiltrated large volumes of data from the DNC. There's where the DNC headquarters is. The public and unclassified intelligence report assessed that the GRU used a Twitter account, Guccifer 2.0, and the website dcleaks.com to release U.S. victim data obtained in cyber operations publicly and in exclusive to media outlets, and relayed material to WikiLeaks. Guccifer 2.0, who claimed to be an independent Romanian hacker, made multiple contradictory statements and false claims about his likely Russian identity throughout the election. Content that was taken from email accounts targeted by the GRU in March 2016 appeared on DC Leaks beginning in June 2016. The GRU relayed material it acquired from the DNC and senior Democratic officials to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks was most likely chosen because of its self-proclaimed reputation for authenticity. Disclosures to WikiLeaks did not contain any evident forgeries. Let's pause here for a moment because I want to get some reactions about this, and whoever wants to jump in can jump in. But not all at once.
Well, I'll jump in. I am so tired of Russiagate. So many, it's done so much damage. There's one question I did always want to ask you all, because, you know, what we've learned from Vips and from Ray McGovern and Bill Benny, and the fact that this wasn't a hack, it was a leak. Why do you all think that, you know, Trump has never brought this up, or somebody in his camp, like anyone? I feel like it's only people like us that are talking about what Vips revealed. You know what I mean? Like, Trump will call Russiagate a hoax and a witch hunt and all day long, but never heard him bring up something like that, or, you know, what we learned from Vips.
Because there's a game that has to be played, Daniel, and that game is you can tell some of the truth as long as that truth keeps people inside what the narrative is, basically. It's the same thing with Epstein. You can talk about whether or not Epstein killed himself or whether he was murdered, but you can't talk about the possibility of him being removed from that room altogether and then strapped to a chair in a safe house until the rest of his material was discovered by Mossad and the CIA, and then a bullet put in his head because he was no longer useful. You're not supposed to talk about that, but you can talk about whether or not he killed himself. It's the same thing with Russiagate. You can say it's a hoax, it's a witch hunt, but you can't offer any information why, because as soon as you start going down that avenue of information, you realize, holy crap, we've been getting lied to the whole time, you know. And your reaction to that should be, I'm going to go take the streets and demand some answers. I mean, that's how I see it. That may not be the actual reality on the ground, but that's how it appears to me.
I think that's so true, Steve. I actually have, like, on my Twitter account on eDevs13, that's my pinned tweet from, I'm going to read this because I think Chomsky says it best. The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. And that's exactly what we see with the narrative management.
I have been referred to by several people who watch Slow News Day as a foul-mouthed Hedges or a foul-mouthed Chomsky. So I'm going to go ahead and take the win on that one.
Yeah, that's a great compliment.
Morgan, you had something to add, I saw.
I think it's also important to remember that, you know, as much as the CIA is out to destroy Trump, that Trump is not out to destroy the CIA. Because when it comes down to it, they are still both on the same side. Trump's defense against being accused of being pro-Russia is to note that he has imposed more economic sanctions on Russia than any other president, which is true. He, you know, remember in 2018, the Pentagon, and following the White House in December 2017, and then the Pentagon in February 2018, outlined a new national defense strategy in which they said that the war on terror is not the US's primary strategic concern anymore. It's, quote, great power competition with Russia and China. So as much, and I mean, the CIA and the FBI and all of them are going to be potent weapons in that new Cold War that is developing. And so they are still instruments of the state, and Trump is the head of state. So as much as there is this factional fighting, with people who really thought that, Hillary was their person and whatever, and like-minded people to Hillary, and people who rebelled against that and supported Trump for various reasons within the U.S. state itself. It is still fundamentally the same state with the same basic foreign policy goals. Kind of like what Kendra said, just sharp disagreements about ways to go about pursuing those goals. But they still agree that those goals are the basic goals.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That's what it is. And to my question, like, I do kind of know the answer that that Trump can only go so far, and he benefits just like the weapons contractors and everyone in the government benefits off of this Cold War continuing. So you only go so far. You can't squash this thing completely when it comes to Russiagate. And I just think it's interesting that more people, or people that think that Trump is the savior, or the Q people or whatever, why they don't point that out more. There is some very damning evidence to Russiagate that just he's never touched.
And now they're trying to pivot Russiagate too, the right wing media, to now being, correctly or incorrectly, that Hillary Clinton's campaign colluded with the Russians to get the Steele dossier and all that kind of stuff. And
which isn't out of the realm of what really happened. Like, the Steele dossier is 20-year-old innuendo plus articles that had appeared in Russian newspapers before as the dossier was being compiled, and then a couple of statements of ex-spooks who are now on the side of free market capitalism. Like, not really factually incorrect there, but while they're doing that, they're also hammering home the next Cold War with China. And nobody is really arguing that, except for like a handful of left spaces. And some of them are on the side of, okay, we'll go ahead and do the war, but we're on China's team. Like, it's weird.
Mm-hmm.
It is very weird. One thing I was thinking about too with Hillary is that, as much of a smear campaign as Assange has had against him, she's had like the exact opposite as far as, what I mean, just praising Hillary as it's just like nobody bothers to look at the record that's there. And it's so frustrating to see that something that was so beneficial to our country to know, is really served to, they've really used it just against Assange, tried to, push him or sweep him up in this whole Russiagate, terror, spy against the United States type of thing, when really he's probably given the people of the United States the most valuable information that they've had for, 50 years. Maybe longer.
Yeah. No, that's what drives me crazy is that, well, I mean, I'm very thankful for groups like Action for Assange that do just tell the truth about Assange and, are unapologetically supportive of what he's done, because, I mean, it drives me crazy, even in the independent news world. Some will talk about Assange, but I feel like so many always have to qualify it first or something, oh, you don't have to think he's a great guy or whatever, if you're going to qualify to talk about him, when you're talking about Hillary Clinton, holy shit, I better hear a lot of qualifications, because, yeah, I mean, it's, I feel like there's only two kinds of people that really have, a negative opinion about Assange, like the people that have been propagandized and the people that he exposed, the war criminals that he exposed. Like there's just those two. Unless, maybe somebody knows him personally or something. But people talk like they do know him personally, like he's not a good guy. And it just drives me nuts when people qualify it, because you're kind of doing the CIA's job for them by even saying that. People stop listening,
No, you're absolutely right, and it never ceases to amaze me how many people do carry the water for the intelligence community unknowingly in this country. And every time that Russiagate is espoused uncritically, or every time that one of Donald Trump or Mike Pompeo's narratives are espoused uncritically, just makes me want to shake somebody, but I guess that's why we do independent media, so we can shake someone without catching the assault charge.
And the other thing too, even as people were critical of Russiagate, they never brought up Julian's persecution in regards to it and debunked that portion of Russiagate. It was always showing, the Trump Russia story's bullshit, but they never pulled Julian in and said, this is why and how he is innocent and how he didn't collude with the Russians. And it became even toxic to mention the name Seth Rich because people were scared of political repercussions or censorship. So I don't want to blame the independent media because they did a great job at ripping Russiagate apart. But at the same time, while they were tearing that down, they never built up the person that showed that our elections are being openly rigged.
That's so true. I actually remember when Assange was arrested, there were certain people that I was following on Twitter, and I just remember being shocked because I figured, oh, well, these people are going to come out, and just silence. And that was, those are always kind of blows, you know what I mean? When you think, oh, wow, well, maybe I have to reevaluate what I've been reading from this person, because to me, it really seems like such a litmus test for people out there, just even supporting free press. It doesn't have to be about Assange. This is indicting a journalist under the Espionage Act, a multi-award winning journalist. That's it. That should be enough for people to, even if every smear that they've said about him was true, just that indictment alone, you would think that would be enough for people to be like, yep, well, nope, sorry, that's against me. That's against my own free press. I'm against that, regardless of what they think of WikiLeaks or Assange.
Yeah, and that's a point that Joe Lauria has made too, that the mainstream media really should be rallying around behind Assange, because his case is kind of the canary in the coal mine. If the charges laid out against him, citing the Espionage Act and such, would make us all criminals, whether you work at Sputnik or at CNN. So there should be an amount of self-interest in defending him, and they just won't. And it's really shocking.
And they won't even talk, the journalists that will talk about this, a lot of times don't mention about how, like you just said, it gives them the ability to go after Sputnik and CNN and RT and Fox News and the Jimmy Dores of the world. Because what it ultimately does is it moves the balance of power to where if a journalist decides to be critical of the government or critical of someone who has a friend in the government, they can be gone after because it damages the national interest, the new defense of our country, which is the defense of our monetary system. And so I think that's problematic too, because it doesn't mean that they're going to go and scoop up every single journalist. But when someone goes to break a hard story, an alphabet agency or a private contractor can go up and say, hey, well, did you see what happened to Julian when he tried to break these stories? And we have the laws that'll make it a lot quicker to come after you now. And the fact that they're not hair on firing about that is one of the biggest things that confuses me.
I kind of feel like the self-censorship that takes place in legacy media and to an extent in independent media has gotten to be so prevalent that that it's not going to be much of an ask for people after the fact if Julian's allowed to be extradited and thrown in a hole for, the rest of his days. Like we're already at the point where independent content creators won't come on this vigil, let alone do a segment about Julian Assange, because they're afraid of what's going to happen to their bottom line. They're afraid of what's going to happen to their YouTube channel in terms of it being, no longer suggested or taken off the front page. And that kind of fear centered around the way that we monetized thought is what it's definitely what brought me to Rockfin. It's what brought this channel to Rockfin. I would like to see a giant mass exodus of people to come over to Rockfin with us, but we're honestly having a hard enough time running up against, like, okay, Jimmy Dore's live. That means we lose half our audience. Yeah, he's not saying anything new, but it doesn't matter. And he's not talking about Julian Assange right now. He's not talking about Roger Stone right now. He's not going through and showing you guys primary source documents about why this whole fucking thing is garbage. Nor is he interviewing the fabulous Morgan and Daniel.
Yeah, especially independent news should be screaming about Assange. I mean, it's nuts. Well, all journalists, of course, like, this is your profession. Why wouldn't you speak up about this? I mean, you are going to be next. And I mean, they could be using their platform to tell people the truth like this and to show them the documents. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do. I mean, it's on a very small scale, but the Nils Melzer interview that was in the Republic, I've actually started printing off copies of that. And, if there's anybody who's interested or like talks to me while I'm doing it, like, give it to them, because I swear, like, you cannot read that and come away like thinking that Julian is, a bad guy. And like this, everything all the smears are true, it debunks all of it. So yeah, people could be using their platform for that. And it's incredibly important.
No, and that Nils Melzer article is something that we did print up when we were in DC and we were trying to hand out to people. It's one of those, it should have been a game changer globally, but I know for a fact that it brought a lot of people who were in the professional class over onto, if not Julian Assange's side, Nils Melzer's way of thinking about the issue. Because they're people who read, trade journals, or people who read just, the financial section of the Wall Street Journal, or just the legal section of the New York Times, aren't exposing themselves to the kind of media that we all proliferate. But to have someone with Nils Melzer's pedigree and his credibility give that interview, and for it to go out, first of all, through Republic, but be translated into like 60 some languages, that's an impact. And that's when we started to see movement with Lissa Johnson's Doctors for Assange. And we started to see movement throughout governments making statements. Okay, I read this thing. It made me want to look at it. Now the Council on Europe has a statement out. Now, the entire, I believe, Belgian parliament has a statement out. And the headway that was gained from that has been completely cut off by this pandemic.
Do we want to dive back in talking about the communications in regards to the Podesta emails?
Yeah, let me get over there.
So just to kind of preface this, for the people that don't know, and we'll read into it a bit more here, but there was a lot of people putting out information in the lead up to the Podesta emails about when they were coming out, potentially what WikiLeaks had planned. And if you read a little further up than where we're going to start at, it even talks about like the political strategy around trying to maximize impact through releasing documents at specific times that aren't inherently time critical and things like that. But essentially, and we'll pull it up here. The Trump drops about the sexual assault came out half an hour before the publish button was hit by WikiLeaks.
So yeah, on Friday, October 7th, 2016, at approximately 4:03, the Washington Post published an article containing a recorded conversation from a 2005 Access Hollywood shoot in which Mr. Trump made a series of lewd remarks. Approximately a half hour later, at 4:32, Target Account 1
Which
sent
is
out,
the WikiLeaks account.
sent out a tweet reading release the Podesta emails, hashtag Hillary, hashtag Podesta, hashtag I'm with her, and containing a link to approximately 2,050 emails that had been hacked from John Podesta's personal email account. WikiLeaks, via Target Account 1, continued to release John Podesta's hacked emails throughout October 10th to 14th, 2016. Are we going back into this?
I just wanted to highlight, because that seems to me, and this isn't a defense of Trump or of the statements that were said or anything like that, because I think for everyone who can remember, this was the grab 'em by the pussy tapes that came out. It seems like coordinated disinformation or a coordinated release on behalf of the DNC, knowing about what WikiLeaks was bringing out, is a way to try to distract from media attention. And that's a lot of what this entire document really talks about is, well, this thing happened and then this thing happened and shit like that. And so I think that above and beyond anything, that was a really important part to highlight, because it showed how they had it almost, the intelligence agencies in this case, had it almost down to the minute for when these releases were coming out. And as these releases were coming out is when things like Pedogate and Pizzagate started trending. And then that's when you saw the term fake news immediately just appear and get plastered across the internet.
Right, and hashtags like Podesta emails or DNC leaks, those were being suppressed too. Well, I mean, we learned that later. It was like over 50%. The Twitter was just, I mean, I'm sure it was probably more than that, but they were totally squashing those and hiding them from everyone, which continues to this day. They just did it with Joe Biden, but yeah. So yeah, controlling the narrative, 100%.
Yeah, and I mean, let's say even, you know, let's grant their claim just for the purpose of argument for a second and say, okay, so they did, let's say, I don't know, whoever operates the WikiLeaks Twitter account saw, you know, turned on the TV, saw the news about the Access Hollywood and said, you know what, let's drop this thing now. And then they went and published it like a half an hour later. Let's say that's exactly how that happened. And they were like, let's just do this to hurt Donald or to hurt Hillary Clinton or whatever. That doesn't prove anything except that they hate Hillary Clinton. Like, it's they have the stuff, they can publish it whenever they want. Every single news service is going to do that, right? Think about you were talking about Jeffrey Epstein earlier. Think about how what news network was it that was exposed a couple months ago of having sat on the story for like a year and a half or something? You know, that's what news agencies do. When they think they have juicy stuff.
ABC.
What's that?
I think it was ABC.
I think you're right. Yeah, there was that hot mic recording where she was talking about like we had it all and you know, didn't do anything with it. Like, that's what news agencies do. That's kind of what happens. And so, like, even if they did, like, it doesn't prove that, like, oh, they did it because the Russians told them to do it. You know, it doesn't prove that there was some kind of larger coordinated thing at work between the Trump campaign and WikiLeaks, or the Russian government and WikiLeaks, or whoever you want to like pretend was controlling WikiLeaks or whatever. Like, it doesn't even if this what they said, their little timeline thing is true, it doesn't prove anything in itself. I mean, am I wrong? Do you think that I am mistaken in that logic?
No, not at all. If you could you provide a little bit of insight into how journalists and media institutions get ahead of a story?
When I have a tip for that, I'll be happy to share it.
I just mean like the the generalized practice of getting ahead of a story, not like specific examples.
I mean, it's all about sourcing, right? It's about being able to get a hold of the information before other people. And sometimes that's having reporters on the ground. Sometimes that's, just knowing people, like sometimes it's as simple as following the right Twitter accounts, and seeing like the little things, somebody's talking about it and having that ability to realize this is actually a story of national or international significance and be able to pick up on it before somebody else does. There's also the simple things like wires, there are wires services such as Sputniks, but also like AFP and Reuters and all of that are constantly putting out little wires and things about, whatever. And there's also just, like your reputation as a reporter, or your reputation as, a news agency or whatever, that people bring you information that they have that they realize is of significance, and they give it to you in much the same way that like when Chelsea Manning had the information that she had, she tried to take it to the New York Times. She tried to take it to a couple of news agencies who refused to run it. And that's actually why she wound up running it, giving it to WikiLeaks instead, because they wouldn't take it. But that's like just one example of like the ways that like news agencies will get a hold of that kind of information and, be the exclusive ones who publish it.
Well, and I think that's such a good point to bring up too, that they wouldn't take it. There was a time where they would take things like that, and that's gone. It's the same thing to me when people, try to call Chelsea Manning a traitor or something like that for not, following protocol or going through the system to report abuse or things like that. And we all know that those people who try to do that, it doesn't work. They don't get anywhere. And I think that's an important thing to remember, is that that's one of the things WikiLeaks did, was expose these mainstream media outlets for not being so much mainstream media outlets anymore. It's almost like even when they shared the information there, they're, and all of them did end up publishing this same information, yet none of them are facing any sort of charges or anything like that, even though it's the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
It's just that WikiLeaks wasn't controlled. But I think that's an interesting point.
And I think especially in Chelsea's case too, you have to remember the environment in which she was operating, in the Army. She wasn't out as trans then, but she wasn't even out as gay then, but she was still thinking about, herself in that way. But this was still the era of don't ask, don't tell. That wasn't rescinded until 2011. And so, sure. Okay. Let's say she says, I'm going to go to my superiors about this or whatever, there's dirt on her that could make her lose her job. There's dirt on her that could really just torpedo her entire career anyway. So like, what is she really supposed to do in that case? Like there's rules against retaliation and whatever, but anybody who's ever been in a situation where they've, felt like they could not, like there was a problem with their superior, knows that retaliation is not something that is stopped just by rules that ban it. So I think in that kind of case too, it really does kind of acquire additional, on top of the fact that she was revealing literal war crimes, but on top of that, the fact that like there was really no reasonable way to expect that she would be able to go about this through the normal methods anyway.
Well, and we see over and over again what happens to people who do go through proper channels, where they get stonewalled and they get pushed back off into a corner and nothing ever comes to it. And they get so frustrated that then they do take it to the media. And in Chelsea's case, and in David McBride's case, who's an Australian whistleblower, who's been on this show, has been on my show. He needs to be on everybody's show. That guy's got an incredible story. But they both tried to do this as proper as possible and like actually had respect for the process and tried to go through it. Yeah, none. So in terms of like being shut down by media, we're in a post 9/11 reality now. We're in a post 2011 NDAA, post 2012 NDAA reality, where propaganda is legal, and you've got military experts who are coming onto mainstream channels to deliver a narrative about why we need to hate who we need to hate, why we need to bomb who we need to bomb, and you have to have public disclosure outlets like WikiLeaks in order to get any of this done. I'm going to pull up one more section of these documents, and then we'll close out, because if you're not familiar with how I work, I never miss an opportunity to kick around Mike Pompeo.
Good.
So this is in the part of the warrant where they've gone through and taken Stone's communications to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. On or about April 19th, 2017, Assange, using Target Account 2, wrote to Stone, "Ace article in InfoWars appreciated, but note that U.S. Intel engages in sleight of hand maneuvers. Listen closely, and you see they only claim that we received U.S. election leaks not directly or via a third party, and do not know when, and they do not know when." This line is that's clunky. This line is Pompeo appears to be getting at with his abetted. This corresponds to the same as all media, and they do not make any allegation that WikiLeaks or I am a Russian asset. On or about June 4th, Roger Stone wrote back to Target Account 2, "Still nonsense. As a journalist, it doesn't matter where you get information, only that it is accurate and authentic. The New York Times printed the Pentagon Papers, which were indisputably stolen from the government, and the courts ruled it was legal to do so and refused to issue an order restraining the paper from publishing additional articles." True. It was one of those rare times where Roger Stone told the unvarnished truth. If the U.S. government moves on you, I will bring down the entire House of Cards. With the trumped up sexual assault charges dropped, I don't know of any crime you need to be pardoned for. Best regards. Target 2 responded, "Between CIA and DOJ, they're doing quite a lot. On the DOJ side, that's coming most strongly from those obsessed with taking down Trump, trying to squeeze us into a deal." Stone wrote, "I'm doing everything possible to address this at the highest level of government. Federal treatment of you in WikiLeaks is an outrage. Must be circumspect in this forum. As experience demonstrates, it is monitored." That's hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. But yeah, the simple fact of the matter is Mike Pompeo goes on national television, especially at this time, and he tries to use all of these weasel words and these like not maneuverable phrases, malleable language, where he doesn't actually have to say the reality of the situation, as long as he uses words like abetted or may have been or we believe they, and Pompeo, of course, famously says, "When I was at the CIA, we lied, we cheated, we stole, we had manuals about it." Why people don't make the connection that a man who is an admitted and trained serial liar might be lying to them when he gets on camera to talk. I don't know.
Yeah, so this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's not logical after all that we know, and as much as we've been lied to, how many wars we've been lied into. It's really not logical to trust the government or to trust somebody like that anymore. You need to start off at, they are lying to me, and then work from there. But yeah, I think this shows just how powerful the permanent state is in Washington too in this document. But sorry, you can go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, this actually really excellently demonstrates what I was talking about earlier, about how Roger Stone tries to like kind of position himself as like, you better be nice to me, you better, because I'm your man, if they move on you, I'll tear down the whole House of Cards. And it's like, realistically, how is he going to do that? He held no office. What was he at that time? You know what I mean? Like, this is what, early 2017, I think. he's nothing. So, you know, he's just all bluster. And I mean, that's really all that he's ever been. You know, like I said, like I kind of begun this with that Trump quote that, you know, he's the guy who goes around claiming, you know, to have, what did he say? Taking credit for things that he never did. Which is what he did. If you remember, he also tried to take credit for the so-called Brooks Brothers riot in Florida in 2000 that eventually led to the recount that led to George W. Bush getting elected, or selected, I should say, by the Supreme Court in 2000. You know, I think you said it earlier, he was basically one of the guys who invented modern political consulting in its modern form. You know, he was taught to do it by Roy Cohn, who was the chief counsel for Joseph McCarthy in 1954. You know, he was part of the Dirty Tricks campaign in 1972. This is like a guy who is just built on bullshitting and getting paid lots of money for it, and trying to turn it into a position that benefits him. So I thought this excellently encapsulated that kind of the kind of person that he is.
I think it's also important to point out whenever anyone talks about Roger Stone has a tattoo of Richard Nixon on his back. I'm not making this up. There's like picture, you could Google image it right now. But Roger Stone,
I don't want to see Roger Stone with his shirt off. Sorry.
In a cocaine-fueled frenzy, went to a tattoo parlor and got Richard Nixon inked on his back for life. Now, I don't know if this was a preventative measure, if he saw that he would be going to prison at some point in his future and just kind of use that to ward off would-be attackers. I don't know. I don't. But I do have to always point out that Roger Stone has a tattoo of Richard Nixon on his back. Now you can all live with that image for the rest of your life. You're welcome.
And for the idea of him being able to tear down the whole house of cards, where's it at? Right? So we've seen Julian Assange throughout this entire process, like since 2016, repeatedly be accused of being a Putin puppet or that WikiLeaks guy. They brought back the rape allegations against him. They drug him out of the Ecuadorian embassy after a $4.2 billion loan and a warrant signed off on by Trump's Department of Justice, most specifically William Barr, and then kept in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. And then the prisoners had to not riot, but organize to get Julian out of solitary. And then a pandemic hits and he's now in 23-hour-a-day confinement yet again. So it really just shows, like, the man, as much as he doesn't deserve to be in jail and he deserves to walk free, isn't someone that is inherently a good person. He is someone that, like we've iterated multiple times, just seeks personal power throughout this process. Even going as far back as his work with NXIVM, if anyone knows about how he was involved there with essentially helping a sex cult and sex trafficking ring prosecute people. So yeah.
Roger Stone, wasn't aware of that. Roger Stone has connection to that?
Yeah, Roger Stone was essentially a fixer for NXIVM, where he talks about it actually in an interview where he got a list of names from NXIVM for people to dig up dirt on to try to get them arrested.
That's really interesting, because wasn't it Roy Cohn as well who, Whitney Webb had tied together the connections to Epstein? Was that him as well? Do you guys remember that?
I haven't read Whitney's work on Epstein. I'm aware that it exists, but I haven't read it.
One more time. Can you repeat that, please?
I thought that in one of Whitney Webb's articles on Epstein, in her big 3-part release, I thought that Roy Cohn was connected there. And
absolutely, 100% he is. Roy Cohn is he was like he was a godfather to both Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. It was Roy Cohn that introduced Epstein to Les Wexner, and it was Roy Cohn who basically from his position of influence inside the Reagan White House was putting people who were connected to both Epstein and Wexner in positions of power inside the Reagan government. On a side note, the only reason the Reagans ever acknowledged that AIDS existed in the first place is because Roy Cohn died of AIDS. But that's a whole different rabbit hole that we can get into another time. Yeah, but no, Roy Cohn is just kind of this, like, you know, arch criminal at the top of a whole empire of horror and travesty and child rape trafficking for profit and blackmail and sport fucking.
Ugh.
Yeah, not a nice guy. Not a nice guy. And also, I mean, it is very important to remember that this is a guy that Donald Trump called his mentor for the longest time because it happened, you know. But no, the extensive reporting that Whitney did on Cohn is worth looking into. He also had ties with the Bronfman family, which is one of the Bronfman daughters is part and parcel of the NXIVM cult. That's who Roger Stone was carrying the water for when he was going out and trying to make their problems going away. Roger Stone is a grade A scumbag, but he's like middle fish, you know. He's definitely not the big fish he thinks he is, but he's made enough money and done enough favors for enough people in real or perceived power to where he is a middle-sized fish.
He wasn't able to bring down the House of Cards. That's for sure. And
He wasn't. Yeah.
And if you do want to see the tattoo, you can watch Get Me Roger Stone. It's in there. If anybody's interested.
No, I've got a documentary on John McAfee called Gringo I gotta watch. Because again, if you guys don't know, John McAfee on Slow News Day, Cinco de Mayo, that's gonna be a hell of an interview.
Yeah, I'm excited for that.
So we're about out of guest segment time. We've got some news coming up here that we're going to get to, and you guys are welcome to stay if you like. But why don't we go ahead and get your final thoughts, and please let us know let everybody know where they can find you.
Morgan, you can go first.
Okay. I guess my final thought in this entire thing, which is really just a point that I didn't get a chance to make yet because we never got around to talking about it, is the fact that everything that Roger Stone was investigated for in this, he was not charged for. He is in jail right now for procedural crimes, for lying to Congress about talking to Randy Credico and a bunch of other crap. So yeah, it's just something. I just think it's just something that's important to remember in looking at this entire thing. Is not only was he not found was he not found guilty of any of those things. None of the assumptions that are made in it, we did kind of talk about that are made in the warrant in the first place are substantiated either, in terms of like the Russian interference and stuff, and in one the Mueller report explicitly said there was no collusion or whatever, which is what this warrant was supposed to be trying to prove. That was the rationale for wanting this Twitter data in the first place. So I guess that was just, I don't know if it's a final point. It's just a point that I just didn't get a chance to make. So
no, and it's such a good one. I don't mean to run over you here real quick, but I'm gonna, so that's how it's gonna sound. Roger Stone got convicted for lying. The lies that he was telling was, I'm got an inside guy to WikiLeaks. I know how WikiLeaks operates. I am the guy who can, I can show you how I've, handled this communication with Julian Assange. And what it was Julian Assange telling him to fuck off. Julian Assange telling him, yeah, no, that's not really how that went down. Julian Assange going, yeah, but this, and this. and Stone being like, "Well, I'm all powerful," and then nothing coming of it. So yeah, I think that's worth mentioning multiple times because the conviction of Stone vindicates Julian Assange and WikiLeaks.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's all that I have to say. You can find me. My work is on Sputnik News, and you can follow me on Twitter at Lavender N Red, the letter N, and the colors lavender and red. So that's me.
Thanks, Morgan. I'll jump in. That was an important point. I think another important thing to remember is that who cares if these emails did come from Russian hacking? These are real emails, and they revealed real election interference. And we know that it's not the Russians that did it anyway. But still, it's just amazing how well these people are at their job of distracting us. But other than that, as far as final thoughts, I encourage you all to reach out to Action for Assange if you want to get involved, to get on our Discord app. And yeah, like Andrew says, be that one awkward person in your community. I'm good at being awkward. So yeah, just get out there, put up flyers. I recommend putting some contact information on there. And yeah, hopefully it will, even though this is a strange time that you're supposed to be inside, you can still go out and put up flyers. And we're planning a banner drop here in North Carolina. So,
bro, I met you. You are as smooth and as cool as the other side of the pillow. All right, you are not awkward.
I don't know about that, but if you think that, you can follow me on Twitter. It's at Daniel DECEDER Deceder.
All right. Well, as we move into our news segment, Andrew really wants us to put up the live blog. I'm unsure if, okay. Thank you, Josh. And you guys, if you're not following the Courage Foundation, Defend WikiLeaks, I do recommend that you make that a part of your like daily online routine. There's some really good information packed in there. Andrew, you have anything in particular you want to highlight?
Yeah. So with this live blog, what this is it's basically real-time updates after Julian's court hearings. It is news and very pressing articles in regards to his situation, when organizations come out and support him, when different figures speak up for him, things like that. They put it on here. So if you're ever looking for just a solid news aggregate about WikiLeaks and the circumstances of Julian, and even to be able to go through almost day by day as things were happening and things continue to happen, this is a great source for that information, to be able to grab an article to read, or if you're an independent content creator, grab an article to share off of here in regards to WikiLeaks.
I agree. And one thing, oh, sorry, Andrew, I didn't mean to cut you off. I thought you were done.
Go ahead.
I was going to just say one thing that I found really nice going through the Defend WikiLeaks website as well is that it will link to source documents whenever they're available. And that's definitely really a helpful thing, especially when you're, when you do have somebody that's interested in their, they want to read more information. It's great because it's all right there and people can see it for themselves. And that's one of the nice things about defending WikiLeaks and Julian Assange is that they give you all the information to do so.
Yeah, so do we want to move into the Sputnik article?
Sure.
Cool.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. My browser, I'm like, my screen's jumping and all kinds of weird shit. So this article is out of Sputnik from yesterday. And it highlights one of Julian's former attorneys, Balthasar Garzon. Let's scroll down to the actual meat here. Garzon, a renowned Spanish legal figure famous for high-profile investigations in Spain's highest criminal court, told Sputnik that the UK judicial system would have turned down any extradition request for Assange were it not for the United States. Quote, I'm sure that if the country that required extradition were not the US, but any other country in the international community seeking to persecute a journalist for publishing reliable information, then it's absolutely certain that the issue of extradition would not even be considered in court. Extradition against Julian Assange has a clear political focus, and we will be able to prove it without any reasonable doubt. End quote. According to Garzon, the ongoing court case surrounding the systemic espionage against Assange and his associates, presumably at the behest of the United States, is sufficient ground to invalidate the extradition. I agree with that 100%. Last year, Spanish authorities arrested David Morales, owner and manager of Andalusian security company UC Global, which Ecuador hired to protect their London embassy where Assange was taking asylum. He is being investigated under charges of spying on Assange. Garzon and an ever-widening list of people involved with the WikiLeaks founder, all the way to then Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa. Another quote from Garzon, we could not even imagine that we could be subjected to such massive espionage. He said, speaking about his reaction to learning the scale of the operation from court documents in the case against Morales and UC Global. We always suspected that Assange's defense team was under the eye of U.S. intelligence, but we had no idea how much they could control us. The information that has come to light indicates that a complex espionage system was allegedly deployed, involving all those who have been close to Assange for several years. The alleged use of microphones hidden in fire extinguishers and video cameras with hidden audio recordings, copying all our identification documents, manipulating phones, even trying to steal a minor's diaper for DNA analysis, etc. Sputnik inquired whether the case at the Audiencia Nacional, Spain's Central Criminal Court, where Garzon served from 1987 to 2011, could change the outcome of the extradition hearing in the UK. Garzon was unequivocal. The criminal investigation in Spain is just beginning. We cannot know how far it will go. However, the material in the case further testifies to the fact that Julian Assange is being politically persecuted by the United States. Therefore, the mandatory provisions on freedom of speech and access to information are now enhanced by the fact that the extraditing jurisdiction, that is the US, allegedly launched an espionage operation against Julian Assange. In this context, it is unthinkable for British jurisdiction to approve the extradition. I want to get some co-host takes on this. Break up the cold read here a little bit.
One of the things I was wondering about too is I don't know what the time frame is on this Spanish case. Do you know what I mean? Like how quickly is this going to go through? Because I know that it's they seem to really want to get and I understand that there's a time frame involved with the extradition hearing as well, but it just seems like that's, they want to get that done as quickly as possible. And I wonder too, I know that, obviously if the UK case did not go Assange's way, to my knowledge, he can still appeal, but I'm a little bit unclear as to whether, whether he would just be taken straight to the US or not. I don't know if you guys know about that or not, but it seems so important to me that this Spanish case gets heard and that there's that all of this comes out and quickly. So I don't know if you guys know more about that.
There's absolutely an appeals process that can take place. And that can drag out for a number of years even. The specifics of it, aren't something that we even really get to discuss because that's still lawyer-client confidentiality, and we have no reason to know the specifics of it. But the process in itself can take a very, very long time in terms of, minutes and hours spent trying to put together the appeal, and then they set a court date, and they usually set appeal dates out really far from the end of the last hearing. Although in this particular instance, they've been trying to move it as scheduled as much as possible. And the only reason that they postponed the hearing that's coming up, that was scheduled on the 18th, is because, according to Vanessa Baraster, the counsel can't be present in the room. Has absolutely nothing to do with the health of Julian Assange. It's whether or not the defense and the prosecution are themselves present in the courtroom. I hope that satisfied. I don't know, maybe.
No, that's definitely, that's what I figured that as well. And I have heard that it would be, years before that's settled. But I think that definitely the Spanish case holds so much promise, just because, per that article, even that we just read, I think that's so true. There'd be no way for the UK to extradite him if they're able to prove this in the Spanish case, which it sounds like, even from the media that we're hearing, that it's a pretty, shut and close matter there, that they have this evidence to show that. And I think that's great news for Assange.
Well, they've got internal emails written by David Morales that we've shown and discussed on the vigils before. And that's how we know that Sheldon Adelson was involved in it, and his casinos were used as meeting spots for Elena Moreno and his staff to deliver personally this material to the CIA. Morales frequently refers to the CIA as the American client or the American customer. It is really not looking good for him, for his company, and this is something where, obviously, if you're the CEO of a security company, you can take your legal team and drag this out in court for a really, really, really long time. So how much of a part it's going to play in Julian Assange's case, I can't answer with any kind of, certainty. Andre?
I don't actually remember if they'll be able to introduce the evidence from this case or not, because that was a really big question early on, was if the Spanish security case would even be able to overlap with evidence into the case that's happening in the UK with the extradition hearing. So I'm not entirely sure if that's allowed in or not. That's something I'll double check on and talk about on Saturday.
God damn it. I was going to ask Sleepy Josh if he could pull up the tweet that Stella Morris put out so we can play that killer little video. Because it's something like 1,300 journalists and whistleblowers from over 100 countries have signed an open letter, spoken out for Julian Assange, and this is a video clip that is actually something that we were trying to get together as Action for Assange before we went to DC, and it got put into the to-do pile and sort of fell by the wayside. So I'm really, really glad that somebody, through collective consciousness or whatever, had the same idea and ran with it. And I'll shut up now so we can play the thing.
We journalists around the globe express our grave concern for Julian Assange's detention in a high-security British prison.
And for the unprecedented espionage charges he faces in the United States.
If he is extradited to the US, he could receive a sentence of 175 years in prison.
This is the first time a publisher is being prosecuted for disclosing classified information.
This is why I am speaking up in defense of Julian Assange, now at this dangerous time.
He's being prosecuted
for the crime of revealing war crimes.
It is a terrible miscarriage of justice.
And as a precedent threatens our journalist colleagues working all around the globe.
Without WikiLeaks, we wouldn't know about
the evidence of war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan.
NSA spying on world leaders and UN representatives, abuse and torture at Guantanamo and other sites, and much more.
Publishing classified information in the public interest is an essential part of journalism.
Many of the media outlets we work for release these stories alongside WikiLeaks.
If the US government can extradite Assange for this, it will clear the way for governments to
criminalize any of us anywhere in the world. Who will be next?
Journalists and publishers should be able to shed light on government wrongdoing without the fear of being jailed.
We, journalists of many countries, demand that Assange
be released immediately from prison.
That the UK government and judiciary refuse to permit a politically motivated extradition.
And that the US government drop the charges of espionage.
What happens to Julian Assange could happen to all of us.
So that article or that video to me is probably one of the most powerful things that can come out right now, because that is journalists across the world that realize that this situation is intimately tied to their careers and the threat that they face for criminal prosecution. Because what this essentially allows, and it's actually what we've seen in Brazil with the journalistic prosecutions out there, is it's going to allow, let's say, a Chinese outlet to target a Greek journalist. It's going to allow for an Italian newspaper or an Italian government official to target someone in Madagascar for publishing information that they don't like. Because this is going to set an international legal precedent that your national security laws apply globally, but all other laws apply only to your citizens. So any journalist anywhere in the world revealing any information about any government allows that government to seek extradition and punish that journalist based on the international legal precedents set by the United States going after Julian Assange.
That's so true. It's not just our own free press here, it's the free press everywhere. And our journalists even, say they expose something in China and somebody's in another country just traveling. What's to stop China from extraditing from there? I think people have the idea that, the US would not, people could never extradite people from the US and do that to us. And it's like, what if somebody's not in country? They could easily do that. And I think that's, it's really terrifying. But I think, honestly, seeing this video, it made me really hopeful and happy that more and more people, I just feel like all the time the wave's getting bigger, and more people are coming on board. And, it's like Julian Assange says, courage is contagious. So I thought that was, I was really happy to see that put together. Did you guys want to move on to this last article?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And then maybe we'll actually wrap on time for once. That would be wild.
Okay, so I just think this is great because still, even, with everything that Julian Assange is going through right now, he's still being active, and still, I just think this is great. So this article is titled "Julian Assange and Catalan Political Prisoners Lead Collective Letter to the UN Over the Situation in Prisons During the COVID-19 Pandemic." And this is Assemblea. Is that how you guys would pronounce that? That's the outlet this is on. Among the signatories are the Catalan political prisoners, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, and activists imprisoned in Argentina, Colombia, Guatemala, Honduras, Morocco, and Western Sahara. Around 30 political prisoners from different territories around the world have sent a letter to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, former Chilean President Michelle Bachelet, with the purpose of denouncing their situation of imprisonment during the coronavirus crisis. After international institutions and organizations such as the Council of Europe, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch recommended reducing the population in prisons due to the high risk of spreading the disease. In late March, the High Commissioner herself called on governments to take urgent measures to protect the health and safety of people imprisoned or detained in other facilities. As part of efforts to curb the COVID-19 pandemic, especially the elderly, the sick, each and every person who is imprisoned without sufficient legal basis, including political prisoners and others detained for having expressed critical or dissenting opinions, as well as low-risk prisoners. In the letter, the political prisoners expressed their concern that many states are not complying with their recommendations, and that, as I know I'm ruining this name, Bachelet put it, keeping prisoners in detention during this pandemic carries a high risk for their lives and health, especially given the lack of hygiene, health, resources, and overcrowding in prisons and detention centers in most of their countries. According to the signatories, the danger not only comes from the risk of outbreak, but also from the repression against the protests that some prisoners have carried out in different detention centers. Do you guys want to comment on any of that before I go on?
I was just thinking that it's crazy that Julian Assange is still making headlines while in these prisons in other countries in solidarity with people around the world. And that's my biggest takeaway is even while he is facing 23 to 24 hours a day solitary confinement, no access to his legal team except through a non-secure video link, no visits from outsiders, in a prison that he has stated is barely functioning, he still manages this, like, to stand with other people that are facing situations as bad, if not worse, than him.
Yeah, and his relationship with the Catalonian people is pretty well documented. He's gone to bat for them so many times, and even recently, just this past year, won an award for his work with people of Catalan. How many countries have political prisoners again? Like that, it's just we've got to move to a post-partisan reality. We've got to somehow collectively ascend to the point to where political parties mean absolutely nothing, because the quantity and quality of the political prisoners that currently exist right now, how much is the world missing out because these people are stuck in a hole rotting?
Exactly. I'll keep reading. Political prisoners from all corners of the world. Among the signatories are the imprisoned Catalan civic and political leaders, such as the former president of the Catalan National Assembly, Jordi Sanchez, the president of, I got the difficult article, Òmnium Cultural, Jordi Cuixart, the former vice president of the Catalan government, Oriol Junqueras, the former Speaker of the Parliament of Catalonia and former President of the Catalan National Assembly, Carme Forcadell, and former ministers Raúl Romeva, Joaquín Forn, Dolores Bassa, Josep Rull, and Jordi Turell, as well as, but also WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who is currently under extradition trial at the UK under harsh conditions. The Catalan National Assembly, together with other Catalan organizations, organized a massive rally in favor of Assange's freedom in late February of 2020. And you just can't help but think again, there were so many, big protest movements and things going on around the world before this, COVID pandemic. And that was, just shut that off everywhere. It's like, all the governments seem to be able to agree on this, which is interesting. Further signatories are the leader of the popular movement of the RIF, Nasser Zefzafi, the activist Mahfouda Bamba Lefkir, and the journalist Bakir Madar Kata from Western Sahara, Bernardo Calzol, indigenous Mayan Defender Guatemala activists such as Milagro Sala and Luis Delia from Argentina, Julian Andres Gil Reyes. I'm just butchering these names, I apologize. Jose Murillo and Jorge Enrique Nino from the Congreso de los Pueblos of Colombia, and the representatives of the Defensores del Agua, el Ambiente y el Territorio. Man, sorry guys.
Oh no, you're fine. Yeah, no, you're good. So,
but anyway, a lot of amazing people who I apologize for not pronouncing your names correctly, because we know that everybody who's a signatory to this has been, really trying to fight for a better world, and they're in prison for it. And now, facing basically a death sentence, a possible death sentence because of this pandemic. So it's really ridiculous what societies have, the lengths that people have gone to control this pandemic. But yet we're going to let all of these people die, or possibly die in these prisons.
So to me, that's part of the pandemic, is allowing these people to die in prisons and to cull the population. There was another article that we didn't get to today that basically showed how they're going to keep prisons in lockdown because the conditions in prisons across the Western world and the world in general are so bad that if they open up, they're not going to be able to even control the virus as it spreads and ravages through these prisons. And it's something that this is the portion of the population that people generally ignore, don't care about, or have a predisposition to thinking that, oh, well, they're in jail, so they must be terrible people. When really our criminal justice system, and I'm sure the criminal justice systems across the world, aren't designed to take the bad people off the streets. They're designed to keep power in certain hands, where you see certain populations, specifically like here in the United States, African Americans get targeted with the same laws that whites do, exponentially more when they use drugs at the exact same rates for the most part, and just situations like that. So that's, as horrible as it sounds, we're living in an era of unrelenting global fascism, and the allowing these deaths in prisons is something that fascists wouldn't mind doing, because ultimately they care about securing their own wealth and power, and everyone else is either a tool to do that or something to be disposed of based on race, gender, identity, class, what have you.
Well, and even with the Orwellian thing, we're seeing even worse than fascism, which is, this move to totalitarianism, which is just the natural regression of where these things go. And I think that's just the truth is what we say it is when we say it is.
Yeah. But I would like to thank everyone for hanging out with us for a couple hours this evening. We're going to start wrapping up the vigil. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigmund, Zigmund. You can find this on Twitter at action_4 Assange, and also actionforassange.com. I've been dropping it in the chats, but we started putting out weekly calls to action for people to get involved digitally right now while we're sequestered indoors on house arrest. This week we have media call-outs to try to get more or better exposure for Julian through multiple mainstream and alternative outlets. We have journalists that are in need of support, as well as activists such as Susie Dawson, Liz Moeller, Jason Burmis. And then we also have petitions that if you have already signed them, please share them so that way they can get more signatures. But I want to give a special thank you to our guests that joined us this evening, Daniel and Morgan, for coming on to go over the Roger Stone information with us. And also I want to give a special shout out to Kimber and Josh for being such big helps behind the scenes.
And I'm Kendra Christian, and you can follow me on Twitter at edebs13, and then you can follow Denver Action for Assange at DNV FreeJA. And I know that our group here in Denver, we just sent something out, and we'll be participating in the Wise Up call to action that Andrew had just mentioned, which is just contacting these media organizations and asking them and just telling them, hey, it's May 3rd is Press Freedom Day, please mention Julian Assange and, put your own twist on it. And that's a really easy action that if all of us did even one, that could be quite the impact with our local communities. So, and also a lot of events going on this weekend too. So make sure you check them out. Thanks. Oh, hi everybody in the chat. Thank you to everyone in the chat. And thank you to our guests and also to Josh and Kimber. I get nervous and forget, so I remembered.
If you are just seeing me for the first time, my name is Steve Poikinen. I host a show called Slow News Day that you can find here on YouTube by typing in Slow News Day Podcast into the search bar. I am also now on the Rockfin, and I'm putting out exclusive content there at least once a week. So please go check that out. Endorse me if you can.
You get real quick, Steve. For your final thoughts, we got a super chat in from Carl.
I was getting to that, but okay.
Sorry.
No,
I just wanted to make sure you saw it.
Just fuck up my outro, buddy. Go ahead, handle it.
Yeah, no, I'm trying. I'm trying my very best.
We're doing it live.
Would the fate of Julian Assange be any different under a Sanders administration than a Biden administration? And that question comes from Carl Knight in the chat.
You know what? Honestly, Carl, I want to be able to tell you that, yes, it would be totally different. And yes, Bernie Sanders would recognize the validity of, a Julian Assange and a WikiLeaks. But I can't with any certainty say that that's remotely possible, especially because Bernie Sanders has gone out of his way to ignore Julian Assange and to even make a rule in his campaign that no campaign surrogate can mention or talk about Julian Assange. The guy has kind of backed the national security state at way too many turns and is way too, I don't know, inside the system, in my opinion, to think that much would be different about that. Now, would a Sanders administration in 2016 probably have not gone through with the extradition paperwork? Maybe. I mean, now that it's too late to know, I could probably coddle somebody's hope senses and say yes, but I don't see any reason to believe it. I think that one way or another, an example was going to be made of Julian Assange, because the information that WikiLeaks publishes is too goddamn necessary and too goddamn real. And having said that, thank you very much for the super chat. Rob Juno, who gave a super chat at the beginning of the show on my channel. Thank you, brother. You are freaking amazing. We will see you Saturday, where we will be doing a deep dive of the labor leaks with Mohammed Almazy. And then Sunday, World Press Freedom Day. We're getting the band back together. We've got a great panel. Taylor Hudak will be joining us as our co-host once again, and we will be having an incredible discussion with Cynthia McKinney, Ray McGovern, Elizabeth Voss, and Kevin Gostola, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time. That is going to be a do not freaking miss this. So we look forward to having you with us for that. Until Saturday, good luck to us all.